Moving iron.
Hello and welcome to Moving Iron Podcast number 306. This edition of Moving Iron Podcast is brought to you by AgDirect. No matter how you're buying your ag equipment, whether it's from a dealer, an auction, or a private party, AgDirect can help you finance it. You can even apply online at agdirect.com. Learn more about your financing options at agdirect.com. As usual, I got Tanner Ehmke back here with me talking about what's going on in the overall world. And we're, the cool thing about hunting season is that there's a goose season, but I don't know if there's a black swan season. We should get one of those so we can calm some of this down a little bit. But looking around, Tanner, there's no lack of things to talk about right now.
No, as that makes our conversations that much more fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So what have you been up to, man? How things been going for you?
Digging out from some snow today, and that's the main thing. We're just finishing up our year ahead outlooks for CoBank, and that's going to be released here in the next few weeks. So that'll offer our views on 2023, and that's all of the sectors that we typically talk about on this show. Casey, it's going to be grains, livestock, dairy, specialty crops, the ag economy, the macro economy, all that good stuff's going to be in our year ahead.
Yep. There's been plenty of stuff in the news that we've talked about. We always do a little wrap session here before we start talking, and we kind of have to cut it off here after we get a long list of things going. But there's so many things out there, and I think probably the one thing that I'm sure that you put into your outlook there and how that's going to affect the overall marketplace is this on again off again situation with the Black Sea corridor, getting that stuff open. Everybody sat down and came to an agreement that they're going to extend it out for another 120 days. That puts us into February timeframe roughly, that they're going to have to go back and reassess what they have going on here. But I guess Tanner, you're looking at that. What are your thoughts there, and how do you think that plays into the marketplace?
Well, that's it's obviously positive if you're an end user for grains. Clearly. So, my focus is really on dairy these days, and that is going to be positive for anyone feeding cattle. But, the markets looked like it was more of a muted response, Casey, because I think the markets are still having to price in the uncertainty of these political agreements that are negotiated with Vladimir Putin, and you never know about his position and what his motivations may be. And so because of that uncertainty, that it's something that can be changed quite easily by one party, that being Vladimir Putin, really, that makes it hard for a market to come back and say, okay, we've got a more longer term bearish scenario here with a lot of grain supply coming onto the market, and those exports flowing into the market, thereby creating a more competitive export environment for the U.S. It's hard to make that case because of that uncertainty. So I checked the markets earlier, and they were indeed down a little bit, but it's hard for the markets really to give up that premium just because of that uncertainty.
Yep. So you brought something up here too that I've been paying a lot of attention to, and that's just because of the time of year that we're rolling into. If you start looking at the strength of the dollar, we had a strong dollar for quite some while, and we start looking at all the different phases that play into that. Now we're starting to see the dollar weaken a little bit as we head into this time frame. But then on the backside of that, you get all this inflationary, aspects of the business that kind of cancel that dollar out when you start looking at the export side of stuff. So I mean, as you're looking at exports, you're looking at the strength of the dollar, you're looking at all those things that come into play. How are you factoring those two things into what you have out there as far as predictions go?
Well, as you pointed out, it's still strong. Historically, even though it's come back a little bit, I think the market is pricing in perhaps a Federal Reserve that is perhaps less hawkish. Now that the inflation data that's coming in from the Bureau of Labor Statistics is showing that inflation is slowing down a little bit, and it's still very high, but it's not as high as it once was. And so the Fed followed through with their rate of 75 basis points earlier this month, and now it's in the last meeting, and so now it's anticipated that they may take that back a little bit, and you've got some some of the Fed board chairmen, or excuse me, board presidents, um, that are indicating that the Fed really needs to slow down on the rate increases, perhaps drop it down to 25 basis points. That's what Esther George in Kansas City said.
Mhm.
And so you've got these signals that the Fed may become less hawkish. I wouldn't say dovish, but less hawkish. And so the market is responding accordingly. And so um, that is what we're seeing with the weakening of the dollar, then, is that's the market perhaps pricing in a less hawkish Fed. Because with the Fed, if the Fed were to continue raising the rates at 75 basis points in the next several meetings, well, that's really going to continue tightening monetary the money supply in the U.S., and that's absolutely going to put a stronger floor under the value of the dollar. But perhaps now the market is becoming a little less hawkish, or the Fed is becoming a little less hawkish here, and the markets are responding to that. Why does all this matter? Because obviously the dollar matters for our exports,
Sure.
and it's hard. Have a hard time getting there, Casey, that we're going to have a sustained weakening of the dollar in the opening months of 2023. The Fed has said they're going to raise rates to thereabouts about 5% by March. And even if they were to come back off of that a little bit, they're still going to keep raising. I wouldn't imagine that we're going to have any uh, serious pivot from the Fed until after March. The Fed is going to be looking for a series of reductions in inflation before they can say, okay, we're done raising interest rates. So I think we're going to have a stronger dollar. It's going to continue to maintain at upward levels. And that's going to be a headwind to our exports, at least for the next 3 to 6 months, in my view. And in addition to, now you've got these enhanced grain flows coming out of the Black Sea region. That's going to add more bearishness to commodity prices. So I think we've got to really brace for these headwinds to be maintained over the next several weeks and months. And depending upon who you are, that's good news, bad news. Obviously, for producers out there that sell grain, that's not great news. If you're a buyer of grain, if you're like, for instance, a dairy producer or a livestock feeder, then this is welcome news. It's going to be softening or loosening your budgets a little bit, and uh, making your cash flow situation perhaps a little bit better. So that's rounding about my view about where we're at right now. But unfortunately, so much of this hinges on politics and the policy rate with the Fed, and Vladimir Putin agreeing to a that export channel. Those things can change quite easily.
Yeah.
So you never know.
Yeah. All right. So as you look at energy right now, and you start looking at natural gas and how that affects fertilizer, and then just the price of fuel related to the price of oil and those kind of things, as you take a look right now moving forward, I mean, assuming that Europe has the mild winter that everyone keeps talking about that they're going to have, and those kind of things, I mean, as you look at those kind of things, do you look and see in the future that fertilizer prices could come down 23? I mean, I guess, what are your thoughts on that one?
Well, the latest information we've heard, and I'm quoting our supply, or our farm supply analyst Ken Zuckerberg here. He just came back from a fertilizer conference. Is that that strong floor underneath fertilizer prices is going to continue to be there? We're going to continue to export LNG
Mhm.
over to Europe. The question is, how much? Is it going to be a mild winter? Is it going to be a hard winter? Right now, you mentioned, yes, indeed, it will. It's forecasted to be a fairly mild winter, so that means they're not going to import as much LNG from the U.S. But we're still going to be exporting, because the Nord Stream pipeline is still offline,
Yeah.
and they're still going to be pulling down on their reserves.
Mhm.
So we're going to have to continue to keep exporting to Europe, and that's going to be pulling on our natural gas supplies here in the U.S., and that's going to be putting a stronger floor under our fertilizer prices and our energy prices here. And so I think that that has to be priced in. That we're going to be having elevated uh, fertilizer prices as we go along, and as as our natural gas supplies continue to be exported. So right now, here recently, we've had a drop in export, or excuse me, on fertilizer prices. So for those farmers that are booking their fertilizer needs and prepaying for 2023, now seems to be a good time to be doing that, based on some of the forecasts that we're hearing for stronger fertilizer prices heading into next spring.
Yep. Okay. So now we've been talking quite a bit about, exports, what that looks like, but one of the biggest things we have happening right now is this, and it's way early to start, counting your eggs here. But I guess as you're looking at what's going on in Brazil, I mean, they're talking like the biggest crop they've ever planted is going to come to fruition, and
Yeah.
and what that looks like. It's like us saying that in May, though, we're gonna have the biggest crop ever in May. That's what they always
Right.
say, but rarely is that true. But assuming that comes online, and you start looking at the cost of our dollar and what that, where if they have a major supply down there in Brazil and all those kind of things come into play. Um, I mean, they need a big crop like that to come through. We need a big crop to come through to kind of get supplies back into a more manageable level where we got some play in there. But that being said, that also, have some play on price there too. So I guess as you're looking at what's going on in Brazil, what's going on in Argentina with their drought that they have going on there, how's that playing into what you see happening in 23, and where do you see, based on that information, like where do you see crop prices? I mean, are you looking at the same kind of a crop price mix, or are you looking for some settling down of crop prices, I guess is what I'm asking here.
Well, I'd say first of all, on the South American crop, yeah, that's indeed what USDA is forecasting, and they've responded to high crop prices just like that you would expect. And so acreage has expanded to record highs. And the question is, what's their yield going to be? And they're right now in the middle of their planting season. We're not going to know until what their yields are until February,
Right.
thereabouts. I would point out that La Nina typically means hot and dry for southern Brazil and parts of Argentina.
Mhm.
And so that would be uh, impactful to their productivity in those important growing regions. And so that would be overall bullish. Now, you add in the fact that we still have a strong dollar, and it looks like we're probably going to maintain a strong dollar at least into March, with a expected strong crop. It may not be record big, depending upon what happens to the weather. But that really is a big gamble. We just kind of have to go off of what we know. We know that we're going to have expanded acreage, so you have to make your bets based on that. We're going to
Mhm.
have record large acreage, so you can only really project with any confidence here that yes, they will follow through with a very very large crop down there in South America. With our strong dollar, that's going to be two major headwinds to our grain exports, and then potentially resulting in some softer cash prices here in the U.S. I mean, that's how that goes. I would add in there's some other potential headwinds here. You've got some uncertainty over in China, the major buyer for soybeans. With their economy, you've had some problems with some of their major hog feeders over there. One of the biggest hog feeders in the world declared bankruptcy. That may impact their ability to buy hog feed or soybean meal or soybeans. And so triple headwinds here that we have to start factoring in: bigger crop, stronger dollar, and pressure in China to buy soybean meal, soybeans for crushing, corn, dry whey for piglet rations, you name it. If it goes into a pig, there's a risk here that we're going to see reduced demand at a moment of expanded supply.
Yeah. Okay. So when you are looking at kind of that spectrum, I mean, so are you assuming everything goes away? Are you assuming that there's going to be lower crop prices in the US based around that?
I think that's the only assumption really you can walk away with at this point. When you have those three major factors of concerning economic conditions around the world, especially over in China, expanded production down in South America. Again, we'll see what happens with yield given the weather, but we have to go off of what we know, and that's probably going to be expanded acreage that they're doing right now. They're planting right now. And the dollar, we're going to assume, is going to continue to maintain some level of strength into next year. It may come down a little bit, but we're still very high. So with all of those factors, I would assume that we're going to have some very strong downward pressures in the several weeks and months ahead into 2023. Now, that being said, we still have our weather issues here that we have to contend with. Drought in the western half of the United States, that's going to be impacting farmer decisions. So there's a lot of things where we may see some farmer support under prices. But I think the overarching view here is with these fundamentals of expanded acreage, of a strong dollar, and some risk over in China and economic risk globally, that paints a little bit more of a bearish scenario in my mind.
Right on. All right. So with the grain corridor open out of the Black Sea, you're going to see more. You should see more, and I don't know how much more, but you should see more of Ukrainian and Russian wheat leave, and most of that is predominantly shipped to Northern Africa and over into Asia. I guess looking at that right now, we've seen the famine issues that we've seen in there, and the issues that we've seen with various things coming out of India and those kind of things when they're cutting off supply. As that supply opens up and we see more of this corridor come in, how do you think that's going to splash against what we see happening in the world now? I mean, as that comes out and there's less, I mean, obviously those countries are looking at, places like Washington and places like, other parts of the United States where they can get some grain to come out and those kind of things. I guess looking at that part now, what's your thought there, and how do you think that's going to calm down some of these various coup attempts we see all over the place, and the various famines and those kind of things? How fast do you think that's going to take place, and then what is your outlook on that?
Well, the geopolitical situation.
Good times, always.
Yeah, I'm a little reluctant to comment on how that I would assume it'd be impacted. Africa is obviously going to be taking a lot of product that comes, a lot of agricultural product altogether. We're talking grains, we're talking dairy products, you name it.
Yeah.
They're going to take what they can get out of Europe because that's the easiest trade, and then we're a little bit longer across the ocean to fill that market. So as we start to see those grain flows out of Ukraine and the Black Sea move faster, obviously that's going to be the benefit to those African countries who have had to pivot over to India for a lot of their imports. And so that was especially for rice is what they were doing. They were leaning more on rice, and I'm really talking about those West African countries that leaned a lot harder on rice this year. So I think, that's absolutely going to buy some more stability in those areas as food costs come down. And it's been mentioned many times, the comparisons of high wheat prices, high bread prices, and the Arab Spring. And when bread prices were record high, you had all that political instability. Well, now that perhaps we'll see some taming of those prices, perhaps we'll see some more political stability. That would be my expectation. But I'm not really a geopolitical expert on that region, so I'm not going to tell you what coup is going to happen next. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah, you find a geopolitical expert, and I'll show you someone that is guessing as much as I am. What's happening in that markup. Now, so let's jump over to your specialty right now. So your specialty with CoBank is dairy and high value crops, correct? I mean, that's your specialty crops and those kind of things.
Yeah,
right?
I'm pivoting more to dairy now because that's been our growth forecast here. Is we're going to see a lot of expansion in dairy over the next several years, and so we wanted to have full-time analyst without having me splitting my time between dairy and, as you mentioned, high value or specialty crops. I'm going to be focusing on dairy. We will be hiring a specialty crops analyst here shortly. But yeah, in dairy, that's an interesting industry because it's going to be at the nexus of all these things that we're just talking about with grain, and then also with the consumer, direct impacts there with at retail with dairy products. So, our view here with dairy is that it's going to be a margin compression environment, we'll say, over the next several months, with the herd having responded to record high prices this year. We've got looser milk flows. We've got more milk flowing out of Europe, and so that's going to moderate milk prices a little bit. But remember, we're still pretty tight globally. And so that doesn't mean we're going back to $13 milk. I would not bet on that. Perhaps just a slight moderation. And so that's going to compress farmer margins here in the U.S. a little bit. But I wouldn't say it would be a wholesale collapse of the industry. We're not near to that.
Right.
I'd say the big problem here is going to be on the cost of production. Given all
Right.
that we've had high costs of feed over the last several months. And I think an outlook here for some weaker feed costs or some lower feed costs would be welcome news for a lot of farmers that are feeding cattle and milking cows. And so I think that would be welcome news for 2023. But as this all goes, so much of this is dependent on political environments, and we are not in a stable political environment.
What are you talking about, Tanner? It's crazy talk.
Well, we just got through the midterm elections without without any coups, so we'll take that as a win, right?
Yeah, you got to throw that in there. Yeah. All right, Tanner, good stuff, man. Folks want to reach out to you and get more information about what it is you're doing at CoBank and how to get some of this information you're talking about. What's the best way to do that?
They can go to our website, cobank.com. That's COBANK.com, and they can find our research on the Knowledge Exchange tab on the homepage, and you can find everything that we produce there. And then you can, of course, reach out to us through the contact information there.
Right on. It's well worth your time to go check that out, folks. CoBank.com and that Knowledge Exchange tab. There's tons of information there. A lot of forward-thinking people thinking about a lot of stuff that, frankly, I don't have time to think about because it's a lot of deep stuff in there. So check that out. Tanner, I appreciate you being on the podcast, man.
Yeah, thanks, Casey. Thanks for having me back.
Right on, man. I'm Casey Seymour with Moving Iron Podcast. Make sure you check me out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Moving Iron LLC. Go to Moving Iron Podcast on LinkedIn and check out the video version of this at the Moving Iron YouTube channel called the Moving Iron Podcast YouTube channel. So wicked creativity right there. So check that out. Go to MovingIronLLC.com for everything Moving Iron related. And check out the Moving Iron Summit tab coming up here. That's be September 11th through the 13th in Nashville, Tennessee. So check that out. So with that, I'm Casey Seymour, Tanner Ehmke. Smooth Smart folks, out.
Moving iron in the 21st century. Hard work.